Rowan Callister had a rule: never trust someone who works too hard to seem trustworthy. He'd learned that at 14, the hard way, sitting in a police station while his father explained to a detective that, yes, the woman who had cooked their meals and tucked in his younger sister for 3 years had cleaned out the wall safe behind the painting in the study. $42,000, a ruby bracelet that had belonged to his grandmother, and a handwritten note on the kitchen counter that said simply, "Thank you for your kindness." His father had framed that note, hung it in his office so I never forget he'd said, "What kindness can cost you?" Rowan was now 41. He ran Callister Group, a mid-sized private equity firm based in Hartford, Connecticut, out of a restored federal-style estate he'd purchased 8 years ago and barely lived in. The house had 14 rooms, a greenhouse, a carriage house converted into a garage, and a staff of 6. He knew their names. He reviewed their hours. He watched the security footage on Sunday mornings with black coffee and a legal pad. He did not consider himself paranoid. He considered himself thorough. So when Margaret, his head of household operations, a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s who had managed the estate longer than anyone, recommended hiring a new part-time housekeeper, Rowan had reviewed the candidate's file twice before agreeing to an interview. The candidate's name was Blythe Navarro, 29 years old, originally from Tucson, Arizona, associate degree in healthcare administration, half completed, employment history, 2 hotels, a residential care facility, and a brief stint as a bookkeeper for a small landscaping company. The resume was thin, the references were older. There was a 2-year gap between her last job and now that Margaret had glossed over with, "She explained the situation to me, and it's completely understandable." Rowan had circled the gap in red pen and said nothing. She arrived for the interview on a Tuesday morning wearing a navy cardigan and sensible shoes, her dark hair pinned back so tightly it looked almost severe. She answered his questions in complete sentences. She did not fidget. She did not oversell herself. When he asked why she wanted the position, she said simply, "I need steady work and I'm good at this." No performance, no charm offensive. He hired her on a 90-day trial. She started the following Monday. Within 2 weeks, Margaret told him quietly that Blythe was the best hire she'd made in 4 years. Thorough, quiet, arrived before the others, left after. She had reorganized the linen closet without being asked, repaired a lamp in the east sitting room using tools from the carriage house, and had twice stayed late when another staff member called out sick. She also, Margaret mentioned, did not accept tips. Howard, the groundskeeper, had tried 3 times. Each time, Blythe had declined with a small, firm smile and said she was just doing her job. That was the detail that snagged something in Rowan's chest. Not because it was admirable, because it was unusual. And unusual things in his experience required explanation. He pulled up the security footage that Sunday, found her in the east corridor at 6:47 a.m., before anyone else was awake, on her knees with a soft cloth wiping down the baseboard, molding that no one had touched in months. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't performing. She was just careful, like the house mattered to her. That bothered him more than the tips. The people who seemed most devoted were the ones who wanted something. He decided to find out what Blythe Navarro wanted. The setup took less than 20 minutes. He arranged it on a Wednesday afternoon, when the house was quiet, and the other staff were either in the carriage house or off-property. He left his home office unlocked, something he never did, and placed on the corner of the reading table, with practiced carelessness, a leather money clip holding $400 bills, a platinum pen that had belonged to his grandfather, and his personal phone, screen up, unlocked. Then he settled onto the daybed near the window, closed his eyes, and waited. He heard her in the hallway first, the soft, even rhythm of her footsteps, a pause outside the door. She'd seen it was open, another pause, longer. Then she came in. He kept his breathing measured, slow, the kind of breathing that took practice to fake. She moved to the far side of the room first. He heard the quiet drag of a cloth across the windowsill, the soft clink of a lamp base being lifted and replaced. She was working. She wasn't rushing toward the table. He waited. 2 minutes passed. Maybe 3. He tracked her movement by sound. Near the bookcase now, the hiss of a dust cloth along a shelf. Then stillness. She had seen the table. The silence stretched. He counted internally 1, 2, 3. Then he heard her move, but not toward the table. Away from it. She crossed to the mantelpiece on the far wall and resumed dusting. He nearly opened his eyes. She circled the room the way she always did, methodically, without shortcuts. When she finally approached the reading table, she moved around it. Not toward the money clip, not toward the phone. She straightened a stack of books on the near corner, lifted a coffee cup he'd left there and placed it on a small tray she'd brought in. Then she stopped. He felt the air in the room shift slightly, the way it does when someone goes very still. Her voice was barely above a whisper, so quiet he almost missed it. These shouldn't be left out like this. He heard her set something down, soft, careful. He opened his eyes just a fraction, enough to see through the blur of his lashes. She had placed a hardback novel over the money clip, not hiding it, covering it, the way you cover something that shouldn't be left exposed. She picked up the tray with the coffee cup and turned to leave, and then she paused again, beside the daybed where he lay. He closed his eyes fully. He heard her set the tray down. Then the faint fold of fabric, the throw blanket from the armchair across the room. He felt its weight settle across his legs, light and even. Her hands smoothed the edge near his shoulder, once, and then were gone. She picked up the tray and walked out. He didn't move for a long time after she left. He lay there with the blanket across his legs in the room very quiet, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a feeling that didn't have a clean name. Not guilt, not surprise. Something closer to the sensation of reaching for a wall in the dark and finding it further away than expected. He replayed it for 3 days. In his office with the door shut and the footage running on his second monitor. The way she'd said these shouldn't be left out like this. Not accusatory, not pointed. Just honest, like she was talking to herself, like she wasn't even thinking about him. And the blanket. He kept returning to the blanket. It was such a small thing, such an unnecessary thing. He was a grown man asleep, on a daybed in his own house. There was no practical reason to cover him. She had done it because, why? Because she thought he might be cold? Because it was a reflex? Because that was simply who she was? He didn't know how to categorize it, and that made him uncomfortable in a way he didn't like. He started paying more attention. Not through the cameras this time. Through presence. He began moving through the house at different hours, taking different routes, pausing in doorways. He caught Blythe in the kitchen one morning, talking in low tones with Philip, the elderly cook, who'd developed a tremor in his right hand that made him slow and anxious about it. She was standing beside him at the counter, not helping exactly, just present. Philip was dicing onions and she was watching, and every now and then she said something quiet that made him laugh and keep going. She didn't see Rowan in the doorway. 2 days later he found a note tucked under the windshield wiper of Philip's car, which was parked inside the carriage house. It was written in small, careful handwriting on a torn piece of paper. Knives were sharpened this morning. Should be easier now. No signature. He recognized the handwriting. A week later, a framed photograph appeared on the side table in the second-floor study. It was a photo he'd packed away years ago, his mother and father, on the front steps of this house, the summer before she got sick. The frame had been cleaned, the glass gleamed. He stood in front of it for a long time. He had not asked anyone to do that. It was a Friday evening, mid-November, when Rowan returned from the city later than planned and found the carriage house light still on. He almost ignored it. Then he saw movement through the small window. Someone sitting on the old wooden bench just inside the far wall. Blythe. He almost kept walking. Then he saw her shoulders, the way they were drawn in, arms wrapped around herself. Her head was down. Her phone was in her lap, screen dark. He stopped. She wasn't crying, not exactly. She was doing that thing people do when they're trying very hard not to, holding themselves very still, breathing carefully, as if motion might undo something. He didn't go in. He stayed outside the door, half in shadow, and watched until she lifted her head, wiped her face with her sleeve, and seemed to make a decision. She straightened. She put her phone in her pocket. She stood up. He walked away before she saw him. He didn't sleep well that night. He spent 2 hours at his desk not reading the reports in front of him, thinking instead about the gap on Blythe Navarro's resume. The 2 years she hadn't explained and Margaret had said was understandable. He hadn't pushed. He hadn't asked. He'd circled it in red and moved on. In the morning he called a quiet contact, not a background firm, not anything official, just a conversation. He asked about the residential care facility listed on her resume, what had happened there, why she'd left. What he heard made him put down his pen and sit back in his chair. She had worked the overnight shift at Maple Ridge Care Center for 14 months. One of the residents, an elderly man named Mr. Everett, had gone into cardiac arrest at 2 a.m. during a period when the nearest hospital was 40 minutes out and the on-call nurse was delayed. Blythe had stayed with him, administered what she could, talked to him through it. He had survived. 3 days later, someone reported that a gold watch, a military watch, irreplaceable, that Mr. Everett kept in his nightstand, was missing. An internal review was conducted. The watch was found in a box of Blythe belongings in the staff locker room. She had denied any knowledge of it. She was let go, anyway. The watch was found 6 months later in the room of another staff member who had since quit. By then, Blythe was already gone. Rowan sat with that information for a long time. Then he went to find her. She was in the second-floor hallway, making her way toward the linen closet. She heard him coming and turned, hands folded in front of her apron the way they always were. Her expression was neutral, attentive, ready to be useful. He stopped a few feet away. He didn't know how to do this. He was not a man who apologized frequently or easily. He was a man who acted, who corrected, who moved forward. Standing in a hallway with something to say and no legal brief behind it felt like standing without ground. "Maple Ridge," he said. Something moved across her face. Gone before he could read it. She looked at the floor. "How did you know?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Her jaw tightened slightly, then released. "Then you know I was cleared eventually. I know it was too late to matter." She looked up then. He met her eyes. "I had you investigated," he said, "when you first arrived. I wasn't satisfied with what was on paper." He paused. "I was wrong to handle it the way I did. And I'm sorry." The word came out rougher than he intended. He wasn't practiced at it. She was very still. "I've been let go from 3 positions," she said finally, "because someone decided they'd rather believe a convenient story than look further. I stopped explaining because it didn't change anything." She exhaled slowly. It's easier not to expect people to believe you. I believe you." She looked at him as if trying to measure the weight of it. "Whether it was real. You covered the money on the table," he said, "and you covered me with that blanket." A pause. She hadn't known he'd been awake. "You didn't have to tell me that," she said quietly. "No," he said, "I didn't." They stood there in the hallway for a moment without speaking, and it wasn't awkward exactly. It was the kind of silence that happens when something shifts, and neither person quite knows what to do with the new ground under their feet. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "I want to be clear about that." She pressed her lips together, nodded once. "Okay," she said. He nodded back, turned and walked toward his office. Stopped. "Dinner tight," he said without turning around. "Philip's making his short ribs. Come to the table, not the staff table." He didn't wait for her answer. The weeks that followed moved differently, not dramatically. Rowan was not a man who changed dramatically, but the house felt less like a holding pattern. He began stopping in the kitchen in the mornings, not to check on anything, just to pour himself a second cup of coffee and stand at the counter for a few minutes before the day caught up with him. Blythe was usually there early. She didn't perform conversation. She didn't fill silence because she thought he expected it. She just worked, and sometimes they spoke, and when they didn't it was fine. He found, gradually, that it was the only part of his morning he looked forward to. He gave her access to the library, full access, not the conditional kind. He told her she could take anything she wanted to read. She had looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read and then nodded, and the next morning there was a paperback on the kitchen counter beside the coffee mugs, face down, half read. "What is it?" he asked one morning. "Giovanni's Room," she said. "James Baldwin." "Have you read it?" "In college. Didn't understand half of it." "I don't think you're supposed to understand it," she said. "I think you're supposed to feel it." He thought about that for longer than he expected. One evening in December he was in the greenhouse. He went there sometimes to think, even though he didn't know much about plants and mostly just walked among them. And he heard her voice through the half-open door. She was outside, near the garden beds, speaking quietly to Howard about something. He couldn't make out the words, but he caught her laugh, unreserved, full. He hadn't heard her laugh like that before. He stood very still inside the greenhouse and thought, "She's been careful here, around me. She's been giving me the version she thought I expected." He wasn't sure how to feel about that. It snowed that weekend, a real snow, not a dusting, 8 inches overnight and still coming in the morning. Most of the staff couldn't make it in. Rowan shoveled the front walk himself at 7 a.m. because no one else was there, and when he came back inside he found Blythe in the kitchen making oatmeal on the gas range. She had walked from her apartment 3 blocks away because, she said, she figured the pipes would need checking. "You walked in this?" he said. "It's not that bad," she said. "It's 8 inches, Blythe." "I know," she said, and handed him a bowl of oatmeal. He sat down at the kitchen table without thinking about it. She sat across from him. They ate in comfortable silence while the snow came down outside the window and the house was completely, unusually quiet. He thought, watching her, that he had spent a great deal of his life testing people, designing situations to reveal character, watching footage and drawing conclusions. He had been very efficient at it, and he had been wrong in the most consequential way about the one person who had earned the most careful look. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. She looked up. "I structured your trial period so I could watch you," he said. "The unlocked office, the table, all of it. I was trying to catch you at something." She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said finally. He looked at her. "You knew? I thought it was possible." The setup was, she paused, seemed to consider her words, deliberate. "Things don't usually get left like that. And you didn't say anything. Would it have helped?" she asked. "If I'd said something, you'd have wondered why I was paying such close attention. Either way, you were going to watch me until you decided for yourself." He sat back in his chair. "That's," he said, very perceptive. "I've been watched before," she said simply. "I know what it looks like." He didn't have a response to that. He didn't try to find one. The snow kept falling. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the garden was buried and the paths had disappeared, and the whole property looked like something from another era, clean and still and temporarily unhurried. "What would you be doing?" he asked, "if things had gone differently?" At Maple Ridge. She was quiet for a long time, turning her spoon over in her bowl. "I wanted to be a nurse practitioner," she said. "I was in a program. I had to leave when I lost the job. The income, the references. I couldn't get back into a program after that." She said it matter-of-factly without bitterness, but there was weight in it, the particular heaviness of a door that had closed before you'd finished walking through. Rowan said nothing. 3 weeks later, Margaret found an envelope in Blythe's file drawer, placed there by Rowan, who had worked through his attorney's office to ensure it was untraceable, in the way that mattered. Inside was a letter from the Callister Family Foundation confirming a full scholarship to a nursing practitioner program at the University of Connecticut. Full tuition, stipend, housing for 2 years, beginning in September. There was a handwritten line at the bottom of the letter. "You were never the problem. Go finish what you started." Blythe found it on a Wednesday morning. She stood in the hallway outside Margaret's office for a long time without moving. Margaret, who knew, gave her space. When she finally came to find Rowan, he was in the greenhouse, as he often was when he was avoiding thinking about something. She stood in the doorway. He looked up. She held the letter in both hands, not like a document but like something fragile. "This was you," she said. He went back to the plant he was examining. "The foundation has various programs, Rowan." He looked up at his name in her voice, the first time she'd used it like that, not formal, not careful. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, looked away. "Don't thank me. Just go be good at it." She left in August. Her suitcase was small and her car was packed neatly, and she said goodbye to each member of the staff in turn, last of all to Rowan, who walked her to the end of the front path and stood there with his hands in his pockets. "You know where this is," she said, and he understood that she meant the house, but also, maybe, more than the house. "I know," he said. She drove away. He stood on the path until her car turned the corner and disappeared, and then he stood there a moment longer, in the cold August morning, before going back inside. The house was the same. The staff were the same. The Sunday morning routine was the same. Coffee and legal pad and footage from the week. But something in the quality of the quiet had changed. It was the difference between a room that had never been lived in and a room that someone had left. He caught himself twice, making 2 cups of coffee before he remembered. 10 months passed. He was in the greenhouse on a Thursday afternoon in June when he heard the gate at the end of the garden path open. He assumed it was Howard. He didn't look up. "Still keeping the orchids too wet," she said. He turned. Blythe Navarro stood at the greenhouse door in a white linen jacket, her hair down, a canvas bag over her shoulder, looking at him with an expression that was some combination of nervous and certain, in a way he hadn't seen on her before. Like someone who had made a decision and was standing inside it. "The program doesn't end until December," he said after a moment. "I'm in a practicum," she said. "I have Thursdays." She paused. "I wanted to see the garden. The garden is mostly mud in June." "I know," she said. "I missed the mud." He stood very still among the orchids and looked at her. She looked back, and there was nothing careful or measured in it. She wasn't managing his expectations, wasn't giving him the version she thought he wanted. She was just there, herself, unbothered by his stillness. He crossed the greenhouse slowly. He stopped in front of her. "How long can you stay?" he asked. She considered. Philip mentioned he was making his short ribs. Something shifted in his chest. Not the heavy, unfamiliar thing of those early weeks, but something easier, like a window opening. He makes them better when there's someone worth making them for, Rowan said. She smiled. Not the careful professional smile, the real one, the one he'd overheard in the garden and never forgotten. Then I'll stay for dinner, she said. He held the greenhouse door open for her, and they walked out together into the bright, impractical June mud. And for the first time in a very long time, Rowan Callister didn't feel like a man who needed to watch what happened next in order to believe it.